should be recording. Okay, so first of all is just, it is May and we are doing our backyard bird-a-thon. Obviously this year we don't have teams or we're not doing any competition, but if you want to go out and do bird-a-thon, we encourage you, you can go to the newsletter and get the sponsor sheet and go out, try and find as many birds as you can. If you've never done it, basically what we do is you get people to do sponsor, or you can just choose to donate money, and you go out and you try and see how many birds you can find in a day. And whoever sponsors you, they might sponsor you 10 cents a bird, $1 a bird, who knows. And basically you just go out and try and see how many bird species you get and collect them, and you know, people will donate money. So you can, again, go to the newsletter for that. And I have heard that our president, Jay Galvin, is out, you know, collecting. He's got quite a bevy of people who are sponsoring him this year, and he's trying to convince them to sponsor him, like $10 a bird or something. And I think hopefully he hasn't fooled any of them too much, that they're not too deep out of pocket. But anyway, it is one of our major fundraisers, and the money that we get for it, we do use it, like, you know, this Zoom platform and our constant contact platform, those kinds of things. That's what we use some of the money to go towards, presentation nights, you know, that kind of thing. So, okay, next. Thank yous. We need to, you know, do a quick little thanks to all our volunteers and participants this year. It's been kind of this is our last meeting for this season. And, you know, we have a lot of great volunteers. It's been a crazy year with trying to do everything online and stuff. And, you know, there's been a really great team of people doing. And, you know, the one thing I love doing thank yous, because I think so many people deserve the thank yous, but also what happens in these is so many times we end up forgetting somebody to thank you. So if there's someone who I've overlooked in this, please shout out and say, hey, let's thank this person. So starting out, we did bird surveys. So most of it was done at home. Our Christmas bird count was done at home. And, you know, but we did have our leaders go out into the field and still do the bird count. And, you know, it was really amazing because we had a great number of we had an equal number of participants this year as our highest year of Christmas bird count. And so thanks to Kaylin Randall for doing the compiling, and all our leaders, and of course all our participants. Newsletter, you know, we have Dan Streifert, who this year we switched our newsletter from being a paper newsletter to an online, which took a lot of getting used to. And, you know, we're still working out the kinks and stuff. And, but just kudos to Dan for all his great expertise with all of this. And, you know, his job of trying to keep all the different writers, you know, getting in the deadlines and stuff like that. So we hope you've enjoyed the newsletter this year, and that wouldn't be happening unless we had Dan's great work. So thank you, and all the writers who have contributed for the year. And then website, really exciting this year with our website is, you know, we're kind of stuck in the 90s with our website right now, but, and we do have to thank, I don't have her on here, but she should be on here, is Teresa Hertzel, who has been keeping up our website for years. And we've been revising our website. And so we have a team who's been working on, you know, cleaning it up and making it a little bit simpler and stuff. And so that team, Carly, Natalie, Lorraine, Barbara, and myself. And so we're hoping that for the beginning of the season in September, that you guys will be looking at a newer website. And that's all we're going to tell you about that. So, and then program nights. You know, every year Dale Milan puts on a great season of programs. He finds, you know, this year, you know, with it online, it's not always easy to find presenters who are used to presenting on a, you know, a CAN screen. And so Dale, bravo for all these great presentations each month. That has been just wonderful for all of us. And then public relations, we've been really lucky to get Natalie Wilson on board with us. Natalie is a high school student and she just has jumped in. She and her mom, they joined last spring, kind of during the pandemic. So they haven't even been able to go out on a field trip or really experience what Audubon is like in person, but they jumped on, and Natalie is on our board and has done PR for us. And I don't know how many of you enjoyed the wonderful news article about our Christmas bird count that was in the Federal Rainier and the Auburn Reporter. And that was thanks to Natalie's hard work and her mom. So thank you. And then again, conservation, Dan Streifert, going hard for us. A lot of us working in, and we've got some really cool projects that are going on. We're still working on Weyerhaeuser campus, Tequila, I'm trying to think of Tequila Ponds. Right now, the city is looking at restoring the pond, so we've been involved in some meetings with that, and then also the city of Kent at the Green River Natural Resource Area. Those of you who've been down there see there's all kinds of modification of the river, and they're going to be building a watershed building. We've been involved with them, communicating stuff, in terms of continuing being bird friendly and doing trips and whatnot. So a lot of good activities going on. And another one that's coming up or not coming up, but we've established some relationships with Flaming Geyser State Park. So we've got some really neat things that are going on with that. So thank you, Dan. And then our board, Jay, Heather, Barbara, Stephen, Natalie, Laura, and myself all been working hard on the board, trying to keep things going. So thank you to all of them. And I don't know if I am missing anybody, but that's big thank you to everyone for all of your great work. So, and I know that many of you may be obviously, to mask or not to mask with the CDC's new announcements of what to do, and, talk of what's going to happen in terms of opening up and stuff. And so, people might be wondering, what are we doing for Rainier Audubon right now? And obviously this is the end of our season. And so we're not doing anything in person. We're just doing online meetings right now still. And so what we will be doing though over the course of this summer is figuring out what does the shape of next year look like? And obviously it's going to be guided by how everything's going. And so we will be letting everybody know in August, what our decision is. We have to figure out, are we back in person at the church for presentations, or will we be continuing doing this online? Will we be doing a hybrid version where we have, the church for people who want to go and still have the online part, so that people that can't make it can watch online at the presentation that's at the church. So that's kind of thing. And then we have to look at our field trips and how we're going to organize those. And obviously, for us, the focus is always on being safe and, equity for all kind of thing. And so we'll keep you posted. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. And then board elections. I think that you will have received something in the newsletter about the elections for the board. And so you should be receiving an email for the board. And Dan, are you able to speak to that right now? I don't know if Dan's, sometimes Dan's internet's not working because he's in Malheur right now. So, but anyway, if you check your email, you should be receiving an email, and it will have the elections, and you can submit your vote through that. And then another thing that's exciting coming up in September is that is just in the works, and we're getting organized for this is we've worked out something with the state park ranger there on September 11th that we're going to have a Rainier Audubon Day. And so hoping to have some nature walks, some tables walk activities, maybe some music. And so if you are interested, we are going to need some volunteers to help out with that. And so if you are interested, please contact Jay Galvin, and I can put his email in the chat for you. And finally, what you're all waiting for tonight is not to listen to Cindy keep talking, but it's our wonderful night with Kim Dolgen Adelson. And you know, we were lucky last year to have Kim at the beginning of the pandemic, you know, say, hey, Kim, are you okay if you can't do the presentation in person? Are you all right with just doing it online? And she's like, well, it's probably no different than working as a prof like I do and giving my lectures and stuff. And, you know, so we had the GoToMeeting platform, and we were trying to hammer out and practice beforehand to see how everything worked out. And it was amazing. And so, you know, Kim gave us the first part of the Dinosaurs Amongst Us, and she's here again tonight to talk to us. I guess we get to jump into the Jurassic and Cretaceous aspect and looking at dinosaurs and birds that were at that time. And so, Kim, I'm gonna stop sharing here, and really excited to have you back. And
thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, sounds good.
Share my screen.
Okay, and I'm going to mute myself.
I'm going to shrink this so I can see my screen. Well, there we go. Well, okay, it's great to be here. I love talking about dinosaurs and birds, two of my hobbies for a very long time. If any of you were here, we're at my first talk back in the fall. You might remember that the focus of that talk was on the proof, the evidence of how we know that birds are in fact living dinosaurs. But at the very end of that talk, I teased a little bit about talking about the earliest birds. And so this talk is about the earliest of the early birds, and they're the birds who actually lived during the age of dinosaurs. And one of the big things I hope you walk away remembering is that there were true birds during the age of dinosaurs. And as you'll see, there were true birds for the latter half of the age of dinosaurs. So I thought I would talk to you about the characteristics of those birds. I should tell you that this talk wouldn't have been possible really 20 years ago, because it was about 20 years ago that, I mean, you have to understand that birds don't fossilize very well. They're small, they have hollow light bones. And so, I mean, you know, a Tyrannosaurus Rex just fossilizes more easily than a little house sparrow. And it takes very specific conditions in order for birds to fossilize. And fortunately, about 20 years ago in China, they discovered a site that has proved unbelievably rich in terms of the number of individual birds that they found fossilized. And that's really why there's been such an explosion of knowledge. But anyway, what I'm going to do is just very, very quickly review a little bit of what we talked last time, and then we'll proceed ahead. Whoops. This always happens. The very first time I want to move forward, it won't do it. Okay. All right. Last lecture, I spent most of my time trying to convince you that birds really are dinosaurs. And this just graphically shows that if you look at some of the main characteristics of birds, they shared them with dinosaurs. And basically no other living vertebrates have these traits. And so birds are much, much more similar to dinosaurs than they are to any other living vertebrates. And furthermore, if you say, well, which dinosaurs were birds closely related to? The answer is an order of dinosaurs called theropods. Theropods were around for virtually the entire age of dinosaurs. They were very successful. There are lots and lots of species. We found over 1,100 species of theropods. And therefore, it's important, or it's unfortunate, I should say, that when most people think of a theropod, most people, I think, who have never studied this or thought about it, think, how do you get a little bird from a big old Tyrannosaurus Rex? And I think the problem is that when people think about theropods, they do think about dinosaurs like this Gigantosaurus, who's even bigger than T-Rex. It's a South American dinosaur, 43 feet long. Um, his head alone was over 6 feet. When you think of something like this, it's hard to imagine, getting a little warbler. But what if instead of thinking this is your prototypical theropod, you thought of something that looked more like this? This is also a perfectly good theropod. It's called Gigantoraptor, even though it's really not a raptor. It was found in Mongolia, only 25 feet long, so not nearly as big as the other guy, but still big enough, heavily feathered, and with a very definite beak and very bird-like feet. I think it's easier to imagine going from this guy to a bird. And what if your prototypical theropod were something like this? The Tanuraptor. Tanuraptor was only 4 feet long, which in the scheme of things is much smaller, weighed about 9 pounds, and was a little dinosaur that could fly very, very well. So part of the problem, I think, with people believing that birds evolved from dinosaurs is that everybody thinks about T-Rex, who we now know was feathered, kind of as their prototypical dinosaur, when in fact there were lots of dinosaurs that looked more like this. We just don't know about them. The other thing, and there's no way I expect you or you're going to remember all of these traits, I'm trying to make a bigger point. If you look at the traits that make birds special, the first line here, feathers, legs, underbody, and bipedal, are traits that are present all through all different types of dinosaurs, way outside of the theropod line. If you go down to this blue-gray, hollow bones, wishbone, three-fingered hand, bird pelvis, flight, and pygostyle, these are traits that not all theropods had, but were very, very common among theropods. And it's only these last three traits, clawless wings, keeled sternum, and completely toothless beak, that are characteristic of only birds. And so most of the traits that make birds birds were actually shared at least with theropods, and for some of them with most other dinosaurs. Now, just in case some of the terms I've thrown out aren't familiar to you, let me just point out some of these traits. Here's a human skeleton, and we all have collarbones called clavicles. And you've got this notch in the center of your throat where the two clavicles don't meet. Birds, on the other hand, have wishbones. We all know that from Thanksgiving dinner. They have wishbones, and wishbones are when a clavicle fuses. And the reason this happens is because it gives a lot more structural support to the shoulder girdle, because flight really puts a lot of pressure on the shoulder. Theropods had these, non-avian theropods had fused clavicles. Another trait, there are a lot of things mentioned, illustrated here, but it's this one I want you to look at, number 2. This is a chicken. This is a microraptor of some sort. If you look at a chicken, even birds that have really long tails, like peacocks or pheasant, it's all feather. They've only got a little tiny stump of a tail with just a few vertebrae. Dinosaurs, in contrast, generally had long bony tails with lots and lots of vertebrae. So this is the pygostyle. But there were some dinosaurs, actually, theropods, that had pygostyles. And finally, the last of these traits I wanted to point out is the keeled sternum. Again, this is a chicken and this is a dog. If you look at a dog's chest, just like ours, the sternum is very flat. But a chicken has this huge, you all know this from eating chicken breasts, has this huge bone that sticks out from their chest. And that's because they have such huge flight muscles. Again, it's hard to fly. It takes a lot of strength. And this gives more surface area for the big fat muscle to attach to. This is only a bird trait. There aren't dinosaurs. In fact, not even all birds have a keeled sternum. But if you see a keeled sternum, you know you have a bird. Now, there's actually a lot of mess to what I'm going to say today, and want to try to explain to you why it's so messy. Imagine the yellow is dinosaurs, and imagine the red is birds. What do you do when you find something about here? Do you call it a dinosaur, or do you call it a bird? And the answer is, it's a very arbitrary answer. And there's some people who are going to say, well, if I had to pick, if you don't let me say orange, and I'll call it yellow. And other people will say, well, if I can't only call it orange, I'll call it red. That's what these fossils are like. I mean, the nice thing is there's no leap of faith here anymore. There's no missing link. There's no big gap between dinosaurs and birds. Rather, what you have are fossils that just form a very smooth continuum from one to the other. And so it really becomes kind of arbitrary to say, this is the point, this is the line where we're crossing over from dinosaurs to birds. And I call them halfways. I think that would be much better. We should have dinosaurs and halfways and birds, because there are a heck of a lot of animals that are right here that are in the middle. So for example, what would you say if you saw this? Okay, if I said to you, is it a bird or is it a cat? You know, and you had to pick, there'd probably be some people who said one and some people who said the other. And there'd be some people who say, well, I go by the head, so I'm calling it a bird. But then you show them this and maybe they're not so thrilled with that. Again, my point is that there are lots and lots of halfway animals, because there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of traits that are changing as we move from dinosaurs to birds. And in some creatures, traits 1, 2, 3, and 4 are very advanced, but 5, 6, and 7 are very primitive, very dinosaur-like. And others, it's the reverse. And so, you know, there's a lot of disagreement about a lot of fossils if you have to pick and call them a bird or a dinosaur. But I'll definitely get to some real true birds. But I just wanted to warn you, there are a lot that are kind of in the middle. So again, just to finish this thought out, early on in the age of dinosaurs, there were only kind of classic dinosaurs, stegosauruses and brontosauruses and T-Rexes. As you move through the age of dinosaurs, you begin to get to a point where there are dinos plus lots and lots of these half and half animals that are kind of halfway between a bird and a dinosaur. By the end of the age of dinosaurs, you've got dinosaurs, there's still lots of these half and half creatures around and lots of true birds around too. Then came the end of the age of dinosaurs. I'll come to this later because there was a mass extinction 65 million years ago, and now you've only got birds. But for over 100 million years, you had dinosaurs and halves and birds all there together. If you went back to the age of dinosaurs, there would be lots and lots and lots of small flying animals, some of whom were birds, some of whom were half and half creatures. Okay. So here's a dinosaur timeline. Dinosaurs first evolved about 245 million years ago. They died out about 65 million years ago. And we divide the age of dinosaurs into 3 pieces, the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. Each of these is separated by kind of a mini mass extinction. So the first birds, and now I mean true birds, not half and half. Well, I'd probably call them half and half. Other people call them true birds, is right here at the end of the Jurassic, about 150 or 160 million years ago. So what you can see from this is the true birds coexisted with dinosaurs for the whole last half of the age of dinosaurs. I hate the phrase that birds evolved from dinosaurs because I think it gives the impression that first there were dinosaurs, and at the very end of the age of dinosaurs, then you get some birds and then the dinosaurs die out. But in fact, they coexisted for a very, very, very long time. Birds did not in any way drive the extinction of dinosaurs. Neither did mammals. Okay, so anyway, look back here. So we've got some birds in the Jurassic, and then we've got lots and lots and lots of birds in the Cretaceous. Birds didn't show up till the very, very, very end of the Jurassic. And what happened was then there was this mini mass extinction that left open a lot of ecological niches. And so shortly thereafter in the Cretaceous, they just exploded and diversified. So we've only got a few birds here. And then right when you jump to the Cretaceous, all of a sudden you get this explosion of new types of birds. But let's start by talking about those very, very first birds, the birds in the Jurassic. Okay. Okay. Now, there weren't a lot of birds in the Jurassic, even at the end of the Jurassic, but there were lots of small flying dinosaur half and half creatures. So if you were to take a walk and look around, you'd say, oh my gosh, this is like being in a bird sanctuary. There are just tons and tons of small flying animals in the air. The skies were filled, which is, again, not an image a lot of people have. So let's talk about Jurassic birds. First off, we've only identified 2 different species. There are probably a few more, but not hundreds, because again, they came in at the very end of the Jurassic. If you look at them, you can see that they're a continuum from other dinosaurs based on multiple traits, but there's no big gap. You're just getting, for example, if one of the things that makes you a bird is that you've got a reduced number of ribs, you go from 43 to 42 to 40 to 36 to 30 to 27. I mean, you can just watch it disappear. As I just said, there were many small feathered, lightweight flying dinos. You would have probably thought they were birds. So there's a good chance you would have thought them birds, but they're technically not. Both of the known Jurassic birds were dead ends. They did not evolve into modern birds. They're not closely related to modern birds. And they retained many features of classic dinosaurs. Okay. Why are we calling them birds? Again, there's so many features, but it's the size and shape of the clavicle and the sternum, the number of ribs, how fused and reduced bones in the wrist and hand were, some features of the skull, etc., etc., etc. Now, if you look at birds that lived in the Jurassic, they retained lots of the traits of dinosaurs. So 5 in particular we're going to talk about: a killing claw, leg wings, teeth, a long bony tail, and claws on their fore or true wings. Early birds, whether they're in the Jurassic or early on in the Cretaceous, tended to have these 5 traits. So if you look at the very first true birds, they had some features that we don't associate with birds. And in fact, I'm going to start off by showing you dinosaurs that have these features, and then I'll show you some birds that do. And again, a lot of these dinosaurs are what I call half and halves. So let's start with a killing. Whoop, no, I was going to skip that. Okay, killing claw. Okay. This is a velociraptor from Jurassic Park fame. This is what they looked like. Yes, they were feathered. But what I want you to focus on is the foot. The killing claw is, notice their second toe is much bigger than their other toes, and they could elevate it. They could also flip it down. I mean, so they could use it to disembowel or hold a prey animal down. And that's a killing claw. You'll see it over and over again, just because they didn't show it quite right in the Jurassic Park movies. True velociraptors were about 3 feet tall, so not as big as the ones in the movies. The second characteristic that you're going to see in birds, but here is a dinosaur that has it. Here's Chanuraptor again. We looked at him a minute ago. Here are leg wings. Here's its true wings. Here are leg wings. The reason they're called leg wings is they were not only heavily feathered, but they were flight feathers, and in some cases asymmetrical, as modern as you can get flight feathers. You can also, you can't quite see their killing claw in this. The reason they had leg wings is because the structure of their tail was such as they couldn't use their tail to help them maneuver as well as modern birds do. So leg wings took the place of that. It's not so they didn't flap them to get velocity. They used them to help them. Leg wings. Third characteristic is teeth. And I'm starting off with a skull because you can clearly see the teeth here. This is one of the Microraptors. It had a beak too. You can't tell that from this skeleton. This particular dinosaur had fish-eating type of teeth by the shape of the teeth. This is a crow-sized animal, one of the Chinese birds. Here's what it looks like if you, an artist's rendition of what that bird looks like. So again, you can see the killing claw. You can see leg wings. Can't quite see the teeth so well in this picture.
I mean, neither came the nibble on your ear.
Okay. Long bony tail. Third or fourth trait, long bony tail. This is going to disappear and get reduced as birds become more advanced. But in this dinosaur, the genuine long, they still certainly had a long bony tail. This dinosaur could not fly, even though it had heavily feathered arms, And these are flight feathers in terms of the nature and style of the feather. It was simply too heavy to fly, so there's some thought that its ancestors could fly and it secondarily lost that ability. This is actually the largest dinosaur we have that had truly great wings, really modern wings. And here's what its skeleton looked like. You can see the long bony tail. You can see the killing claw here. And that brings us to clawed wings. Caudipteryx, you can see its clawed wings here. This again is a dinosaur, about a peacock-sized dinosaur. There are a couple of really interesting things about this particular dinosaur. First is it had gizzard stones, gastroliths in its gizzard. Most of you probably know that seed-eating birds swallow stones and hold them in their gizzards to help them grind up the seeds that they eat. So did this dinosaur. And so using gizzard stones is something, is another thing, that trait that birds share with dinosaurs that is not, not unique to birds per se. This is one of these halfway creatures. It's very primitive some ways, very advanced in other ways. Here's what they actually found. You can see the long bony tail. Actually can see the killing claw there. I'm going to skip this. But a really neat thing about this, and this is very new, this is from 2019. Someone built, actually Taylor, that's who did it, built a robot of this particular dinosaur, and it had it run. It made it run. And the reason they did this is they noticed that its shoulders were just designed in such a way that they had a hunch that if they did this, when you move this animal quickly, even if you didn't provide any effort, the wings would passively flap. And so whenever this dinosaur ran, even if it wasn't trying to, its wings would flap. And that's really of great interest to people who are interested in bird evolution, because there's always a debate about how did flight come about. And this guy did not fly, but his arms flapped. And that suggests that at least some of the time, flapping came before gliding. There are other birds that we believe, or other fossils we believe, show that for some lines, gliding came before flapping. Okay, but let's get to birds. Okay. This is Archaeopteryx, and until recently, it was considered the oldest true bird. This is one of the most important fossils ever discovered. And it was discovered a long time ago in 1861. The reason it was so important was Darwin published his Origin of Species in 1859, I believe, just a few years before. And this was seen as just fabulous evidence that Darwin was onto something, because this is a half and half creature. We call it a bird, but the truth is it's got dinosaur features and it's got bird features. Again, it's from the very late Jurassic. It's a dead end. It didn't lead to modern birds, about the size of a raven. It had all those primitive features we've just been talking about. And I can tell you that if this fossil were found today, we would call it a dinosaur, not a bird. It was called a bird back then because it was so much more bird-like than any of the other dinosaurs that had been discovered. Now we've discovered so many bird-like dinosaurs that he would actually go into the dinosaur pile. Definitely capable of flight, but not very good flight. And the way I envision him flying is like a goldfinch. People were mentioning goldfinches before. And if you watch a goldfinch fly, you get a sinusoidal wave. It goes up and then it goes down, it goes up and it goes down. This bird, Archaeopteryx, would have flown that way. And the reason we know that is if you look at the way its shoulder is constructed, it only would have created force on the downstroke, not the upstroke. So when it flapped down, it would elevate, and then it would fall, and then it would elevate and would fall. So it flew just like a goldfinch does, which I think is a really amazing detail to be able to talk about, for a bird 150 million years ago. It had true asymmetrical flight feathers. Its brain to body ratio was bigger than most dinosaurs, though not nearly as big as birds. and it was carnivorous, we can tell by its teeth, lived in shrubland more than forest. Skip that. Its brain started, as I said, its brain ratio was bigger, brain body ratio was bigger than most other dinosaurs, but not the parts that we associate with modern birds. The part that was most expanded is here, which is its olfactory bulb. This is a cast of its brain. Its visual bulb, which is here, is actually just about the size that should be for a dinosaur. It's the olfactory bulb that's expanded. That's why it's bigger than dinosaurs. This has led some people to suggest that it may have been nocturnal because you smell more if you're nocturnal. There's what the cast looks like. And nowadays they're capable of doing biochemical analyses and also looking at the bones, the fossils, and figuring out what color birds were. So we now know that Archaeopteryx was mostly black with whitish areas along its tail and wings, kind of like a magpie. And so it was colored like a magpie. That would be correct here. You can see its clawed wings. Okay. Until very, very recently, Archaeopteryx was considered the oldest true bird, definitely alive in the middle of the age of dinosaurs. Now there's a candidate for an older one, Aronish Zui. I've got a question mark after the oldest true bird because not everybody agrees. Not everybody calls this guy a bird, but a lot of people do. About 10 million years older than Archaeopteryx and a lot more primitive, especially in the feathers. The feathers were all downy. You don't have a lot of flight feathers on this bird. And so we know that even though it looks a lot like you'd have no trouble if you saw that. If you went to Australia, you'd say, oh, there's a bird. But it probably couldn't fly, lived in the forest, and that's about all we know about it at this point. And again, here's what you actually find, and you have to figure out everything else about them. So that's it for the Jurassic, because again, birds just got going in a very small way at the very end of the Jurassic, but they took off during the Cretaceous. And so now we have lots and lots of birds to talk about. So the Cretaceous ran from 145 to 65 million years ago, and almost all the birds in the Cretaceous died out at the same time the dinosaurs did. A very few of them hung on and became modern birds. We know of over 150 species of birds in the Cretaceous, and some of them were very, very quite numerous. Some of them, especially if you look at the ones in the very beginning of the Cretaceous, retain those same 5 traits that we just talked about: clawed wings and a killing claw and leg feathers, leg wings, etc. As you move through the Cretaceous, those characteristics tend to disappear. Okay, so we now have in the Cretaceous lots and lots and lots of true birds. We still have lots and lots and lots of those halfway creatures that, you get to decide what you want to call it, because it's really halfway between. But let me tell you that the birds of the Cretaceous basically had 3 different body types, or 3 different looks. The first one here is what I just call a normal bird look, with a nice short fan-shaped tail. Then there were a lot of birds that had continued to have a long bony tail with kind of a tuft of feathers at the end. And then incredibly common back then were birds that looked very much like modern birds, but they had these funky tails with either 2 or 4 long, long ornamental feathers. And if you were to look at the birds back then, more than half of the birds were like this. And that's interesting to me because now in modern times, we still have a few birds with tails like this, but they're few and far between and quite rare. Let me show you some of them, some real life examples. Okay, so we've got this guy. This is the ribbon-tailed Astrapia. It's actually the most recently discovered bird of paradise from Papua New Guinea. And you can see its 2 long tail feathers sticking out. Or this one, the pin-tailed Whydah from South Africa, who had 4 long feathers sticking out from its otherwise short tail. This one, the booted racket-tailed hummingbird from South America. So we have a few birds with these funky tails, but back then, like I said, half the birds you saw would have tails like this. And I don't know why it was more common then than it is now. But I can tell you again, I'm trying to emphasize that there's just this continuum from birds to dinosaurs. The very first creature that actually had this kind of tail was not a bird, but a dinosaur, Epidextrix. He had these 4 funky long tail feathers quite a bit before any of the birds did. This is a pigeon-sized animal covered with downy feathers, except for that weird tail. Couldn't fly. So clearly those tail feathers were ornamental rather than being used for flying. And this is the animal with the oldest ornamental tail feathers that we found. Okay. I want to get to birds, but I just, in order to kind of give you an accurate picture, I just want to keep emphasizing that there were all these very bird-like dinosaurs, or as I like to call them, half and halves, in the Cretaceous as well as in the Jurassic. So this would be an example of one from pretty early in the Cretaceous, Cryptovalens, and it's definitely a dinosaur. But way more bird-like, for example, than Archaeopteryx. I mean, if you're going to call Archaeopteryx a bird, you should call this guy a bird. Asymmetrical flight feathers, a keeled sternum. See, here's an example of a dinosaur with a keeled sternum. There aren't many of those. His ribs looked a lot like modern birds. I'll show you that in a minute. A very strong flyer, it seems, by his shoulder and weight. Here's what his ribs look like. There are 2 ways that bird ribs differ from dinosaur ribs or reptile ribs in general. First off, they have fewer ribs to save weight. So just the number of ribs is reduced. They lose them from the belly up. And then they have these processes here called unctate processes, which basically are struts to give support and strength. Again, flying and flapping your wings puts a lot of pressure on your ribs. This is a way of keeping your ribs nice and separate apart and to take up the strain. So Cryptovalens actually had a very modern rib cage in lots of ways. Well, the Cryptovalens is from the beginning of the Cretaceous. Here is a dinosaur from the very end of the Cretaceous, right near the mass extinction of dinosaurs below Bondoc. And you can see how bird-like this dinosaur is. Again, there were just so many bird-like dinosaurs. He's from Romania. He has that long tail, which virtually all the dinosaurs had. He still has claws on his wings. He had a beak with very few teeth in it. So, you know, again, one of these halfway creatures at the very, very end of the age. So it is not that birds evolved and then quickly replaced dinosaurs. They lived alongside of them for a very, very, very long time. Well, let me start off by switch to birds again, talking about just 2 birds from the very early Cretaceous, and then we'll talk about most of the Cretaceous, what the birds look like. But the very oldest bird in the modern bird lineage, this is a modern bird. Its ancestors, its descendants of the birds that live today is this guy, Archaeonithera. Fan-shaped tail, strong wishbone. A big advance is he had an allula, which you really can't see, which is sort of the thumb that birds have on their wings, which makes them very maneuverable and good flyers. Naked legs rather than feather-covered legs, true flight feathers. This bird, more than anything, though it's not colored this way, is very reminiscent of a plover. And what's kind of neat about that is that many of the early modern birds, the birds that led to today's birds, were not even wading birds, but birds that lived on the shores of lakes and streams and poked around in the mud. It's not clear if they went into the water or not. They probably stayed more at the edges. But he's the first one, and he's kind of a prototype of a lot of the very modern bird, of the ancestors of modern birds. You can still see he's got little wing claws there. Much shallow water. And there's just his real skeleton. And then the second kind of early Cretaceous bird I wanted to mention is this guy, Chongornis. And that, excuse me, I got my camera. Which the name means intermediate bird. I don't know what you're thinking this looks like, but that's the beginning of a pygostyle. Okay, this is a long bony tail that's been reduced, by 2/3. He's older than, he's newer than, he came after this guy who already had a short tail. And what that tells us is that losing a bony tail evolved multiple times. It didn't just happen once, it happened over and over and over again. That's why I'm mentioning him. Now, this is where I really wanted to get to. When you look throughout most of the Cretaceous, there are 3 types of birds that dominated the landscape. And these are families of birds. Okay, this is a family, the level of families. So the first of these is the Enantian orniths, and these birds were the dominant birds on land. If you were walking around on solid ground, 95% of the birds you would have seen once you're past the very beginning of the Cretaceous would have been enantiorniths. And most of these birds, not all of them, could fly, small birds that could fly. On the other hand, there were Hesperonychs, and these guys were flightless swimmers, and they're the birds that dominated the ocean. Think loons and cormorants. Think about birds that basically are always on the water. They're diving for fish and crustaceans for their food. We'll talk about those. And then the third one are the ichthyorniths. And these were shorebirds, and they ate fish. And rather than being flightless, these are guys that float. I mean, just think seagull and tern, and you have the right mindset of what these are like. Now, the reason I have a line separating the enantiorniths from the Hesperonychs and the ichthyorniths is because the latter 2 are much more closely related to modern birds than the enantiorniths are. Okay? So it's these 2 that led to modern birds. You can argue about which one was closer to modern birds. You can make a case for one of them, depends upon what features you look like, but these are the ones that are going to lead to modern birds, or very closely related to animals that are leading to modern birds. But I'm going to start with the enantiorniths because in terms of numbers, there were just far more of these than anything else. There are more than 80 species of enantiorniths that have been found. So they're a very diverse group of birds. The thing they have in common is that they're land birds. Other than that, they fill lots and lots and lots of different niches. These are birds that could fly very, very well. I should tell you, the name enantiornith means opposite-shouldered bird. And the reason we know that they didn't lead to modern birds, they're not closely related to modern birds, is because their shoulders are the opposite of modern birds. And I think the easiest way to explain it is to think about your own hip joint. If you think about your own hip joint, you know that your leg bone, your thigh bone, your femur ends in a ball, and it fits into a socket in your hip, okay? That's what modern birds are like, except it's shoulder rather than leg I'm talking about. Enantiorniths are the opposite, where their pelvis has a ball coming out of it, and it fits into a concavity of the femur, except we're talking shoulders. But you can see it's opposite, and there's no way that 180%, 180 degree reversed itself, and that's why we know that it's not closely related to modern birds. These guys had teeth. They had small claws on the end of their wings. Worldwide distribution. We have found them in every continent except Antarctica. So again, these are whoppingly successful animals. However you look at it, they ate every diet. And they died off when the rest of the dinosaurs died off. Most of them were small, not all of them, but most of them were kind of sparrow to robin sized. And an interesting little point about them is that a lot of them seem, can't say all of them, to have buried their eggs rather than making nests and sitting on the nests. They buried their eggs in mounds like modern megapodes do. Okay, here's that funky tail we're talking about. trailing off here. This bird, this is another artist's depiction of this bird of Cradoavis. Again, you can see that funky tail. You can see the little claws on the wings. If you could see, he had a few very small teeth. So, again, these traits just hung around for a long time. But let me just show you some of my favorite of these. And some of these are very, very new finds. Okay, here we go. One of the reasons we know about enantiornis is because since they spent a lot of time in trees, some of them got trapped in amber. This guy was found in 2016, about 100 million years old. And there he is. This is a bird. This is the right size here, who was found in amber. And, they can then look at it. He was mummified and very well preserved. So I can tell you that this is the correct coloration. This is the correct size. This guy was even small for a hummingbird. Note the funky tail again, note the little wing claws. And they haven't even given it a species yet that I've seen. Here's another similar one, another bird, another enantiornis that got trapped in amber. But this one is a little baby bird. Okay, this is a little baby bird, a fledgling, just a few days old, and it looked like it was going through its first molt. This is from Malaysia. It had a lot of teeth in its little mouth, claws on its wings, about 3 inches long. So it's really wonderful to find some of these birds. And you can, like I said, take x-rays and just really, I look at that and I see baby robin. And that's really what it looked like. But again, they filled all sorts of niches. They coexisted with dinosaurs. So I like to imagine them, because a lot of them were insect eaters, doing what some insect eating birds do today and riding around on bigger animals, cleaning ticks and fleas off of them. And so you can certainly imagine an enantiornis doing that. I had to add this, there you go. I had to add this because it was only discovered about 8 weeks ago, maybe 12 weeks ago now. This is the most recently discovered enantiornis. Again, notice the funky tail. And it differs from all other known enantiornis up to this point in that it had a very strange sickle-shaped heavy beak, unlike any other enantiornis, almost like a small version of a toucan bill. No one knows anything about it yet because it's so new, but that's our newest one. We'll come back to these guys in a bit, because I want to tell you now about or contrast them with the Hesperonychs. Okay? Hesperonychs were a highly specialized family of aquatic birds that either were direct ancestors of modern birds or damn close to the ancestors of modern birds. They're just a tad newer than the enantiornis, so they were around since the early Cretaceous. There are about 60 species of them that have been discovered. They weren't global in distribution, though they were very widespread. You could find them anywhere in the northern hemisphere, in the east and the west. They were all over, but confined to the northern hemisphere. These are strong swimming birds that are adapted to an aquatic lifestyle. They're carnivorous. Most of them, not quite all, but most of them had to be completely flightless because their wings are so reduced in size. Their bodies ranged in size. But a cool thing about Hesperonychs is they are the only dinosaurs, because remember, birds really are dinosaurs, to have ever colonized the ocean. So, these are your ocean-dwelling dinosaurs. If you're thinking, wait a minute, there were dinosaurs in the oceans, you're thinking about reptiles that are not dinosaurs. The two we might be thinking of are mosasaurs, which look sort of like porpoises, but they're reptiles, and plesiosaurs, which look like the Loch Ness Monster. But neither of those were dinosaurs. There were no dinosaurs in the water in the ocean, except for the Hesperonychs. I like these guys. Here's an artist's rendition of what they would look like. I should tell you that because this is a misconception on the earliest Hesperonychs fossil was found in the 1870s, and when it was found, it was believed to be a loon. Now we know it was not a loon. But because of that, a lot of people still believe that loons are the oldest or among the oldest of the living birds, but it's just not true. He's not related to loons. In fact, as I told you, these guys are from the northern hemisphere. Loons evolved in the southern hemisphere. So they look a lot like loons, but they're not loons. And again, there are 60 species of Hesperonychs, and you can see that they really range in size from, maybe a foot long all the way up to about 5 feet long. Their feet were not webbed like ducks, but rather lobed like grebes, which also makes you very, very, adapted to swimming. And if you don't know, if you can't tell from this and you don't know what a grebe's foot looks like, there's a grebe's foot. They've got these funny lobed toes. Well, so did the Hesperonychs. Again, just another picture of one. I want you to note, you can see the lobed feet, but how far back his legs are set on his body. Because his legs are set so far back on his body, it is unlikely that these birds came onto land other than to breed. They'd be 100% aquatic birds because you can't walk. The thought is they couldn't stand up, that they would have to slide around on their bellies, because there's no way you can stand on legs that far back. Modern birds that have legs set very far back, but not quite as far back, are penguins and loons. So again, these would have been very, very, very ungainly. Another characteristic they had is that they did have teeth, but their teeth were very distinctive in that they curved backwards like a snake. Let's skip this picture. So there's a snake's mouth, and you can see how the teeth point inwards. This is really good for catching slippery fish or slippery prey. And so that was very, very adaptive trait. And I wanted to show you that even though penguins don't have legs set quite as far back as a Hesperonychs, we think about penguins waddling around, and they do sometimes, but they also go places by sliding on their bellies. They actually can move a lot faster sliding on their bellies than they can walking. And so this would be how the Hesperonychs got around on land. They were colony dwellers. And so, if you were this guy and walking around, if you could transport yourself back to the Cretaceous, you could come across a colony of Hesperonychs. You know they're colony dwellers because if you find one skeleton, you find 200 skeletons. They tend to be clustered in groups. So we have the Enantiorniths, or land birds. We have the Hesperonychs, which are water birds, and I didn't quite say this. So they did colonize the oceans. You could also find them in lakes and streams and rivers, but they basically were always on the water. And then the third family are the Ichthyornis. And again, the easiest way to think about these guys is think of a tern. These were terns with teeth. That's what they were. Just think of a Caspian tern with teeth, and you now know what an Ichthyornis was like. These guys are newer than the other two families. They evolved rather than evolving like, 140 million years ago or 130 million years ago, about 90 million years ago. So they're quite a bit newer. And again, they all died off at the mass extinction that killed off all the rest of the dinosaurs. The name Ichthyornis means fish bird. They ate fish, but that's probably not the reason they got this name originally. Their vertebrae are very unique and shaped like a fish's vertebrae. And so it's very easy to identify these fossils when you found them. This bird, we don't have nearly as many of them as we do of the other two, and it appears that there's only one species. This individual bird was so successful that he lived all over the northern hemisphere, and northern hemisphere birds, but only one species. Lots and lots and lots and lots of them, but one species. So rather than all the different gulls and all the different terns, this was it. So this bird is about the size of a pigeon or so, mostly but not entirely toothless, also having the backward curving teeth like we looked at before, like a snake does, a very, very, very primitive perfectly built bill, not like a modern bird, but the way the beak was made, was very primitive. On the other hand, it had a nicely keeled sternum, and so was modern in that way. Again, these are the third family of birds that were around during the latter half of the age of dinosaurs. So they coexisted with dinosaurs, and I like to imagine them. I love this picture of these guys, attacking a pterosaur, a pterodactyl, which actually aren't dinosaurs, but and you can see their teeth, and you can see them kind of being aggressive and mobbing the way gulls might. Um, and they do appear to have been black and white. All right, so those are our three big families that if you went back to the latter half of the age of dinosaurs, the skies would have been filled with these birds. If you looked out over the ocean, you'd see the Hesperornis floating on the water. So lots and lots and lots of different niches. Now, I really quickly want to go through for you some different examples of these birds so you can see how diverse they were. And I'm not going to spend time on them, just trying to give you a sense of how diverse they were. So if you were back in the age of dinosaurs, you might have found yourself looking at a Patagopteryx. For all practical purposes, this was a bird very much like a guinea fowl, though they lived maybe even in very dry open plains like a lot of guinea fowl do. Mostly carnivorous, though they did eat some seeds, terrestrial birds. And so this is actually a type of an Antionyx. Then there's Eunornis, a ground-feeding omnivore who lived on lake margins. And again, Eunornis is in the line, his descendants became modern birds. And so, again, it's a lot of these birds that are either ancestral to or very close to the ancestors of modern birds were, animals that lived near the water, kind of on the edges of lakes, on the edges of ponds. We know that he was an omnivore because his teeth very much suggest that he caught fish to eat and insects as well, but he has gizzard stones. He swallowed gizzard stones, so that means he's also eating some seeds. Skip that and talk about this guy, Hongshanornis, another wader, another bird that lived on the edge of water, but this guy was much more of a flyer than the previous bird, than Eunornis. I mean, this would be more like a plover, a bird who, just think about how plovers live. They're right near the edge of the ocean. They fly very rapidly, like a sandpiper or a plover, and kind of going around mudflats. They're living that way. Their wings were very long and narrow, which suggests very good flyers. Then there was Gansus, who is very much like a duck, or perhaps a grebe. And in fact, he's thought to be the common ancestor of both the Hesperornis and the Ichthyornis. And so he was water-dwelling, but not flightless. And again, if you think of grebe, you're really close to a diving duck. Here's what he was supposed to have looked like, or two artists' conceptions of what he looked like. And again, you can see kind of a grebe look, believed to be a diving bird. So the thought was as they went underwater. This bird was a desert dweller, lived, not quite in the Sahara, but in quite arid land. What's interesting about him is this is not an enantionorth. This is actually a Hesperonid, which, well, or very close to a Hesperonid. So this is the one exception to the rule I was talking about. No one thought these guys lived anywhere but in water, but this one lived in a desert. We've got enantionorths who were in effect kingfishers. We have enantionorths who were scansorial climbers. Scansorial climbers, the word scansorial means like a woodpecker with two toes pointing forward and two toes pointing backwards. So this was the equivalent of a woodpecker. Though its bill was so tiny, it probably didn't. Instead, it probably was more like a nuthatch, or a creeper. walking up and down tree trunks and probing the crevices of the bark to get insects. That's what, you know, what it was thought to be like. But we've also got an ant ear that's the equivalent of a sapsucker, and ate bugs in sap. Notice that funky little tail again. How do we know that? Because their bellies are often filled with amber. And the only way you could get amber is if you're bugs stuck in sap. There were climbing seed eaters. I mean, they're just all sorts of things. Not all the Hesperonyms, as I said, lived in the ocean. Some of them lived in rivers. So here's an example of one. Again, notice the lobed feet and how far back those feet are, so not just oceans. Some of the Hesperonyms, most of them lived in pretty warm environments, but some of them lived in Antarctica. Though to be fair, Antarctica wasn't quite as cold then as it is now. It was more like northern Canada than Antarctica, but still they lived all the way from the tropics to very cold ocean environments. And then we've got, again, couldn't leave out the ichthyornis, you know, which are our boobies and our gulls. And okay, so those are the birds, those three families of birds, the Enantiornis, the Hesperonyms, and the Ichthyornis, that dominated the Cretaceous. They were numerous. The skies and the waters were filled with birds, and these were what those birds were. There also were a few modern today birds that lived back in the Cretaceous. Not the species that we see today, but certainly the same orders that we see today. But this is a very modest beginning, just like birds evolved in the late Jurassic in a very modest way and then exploded in the Cretaceous. Modern birds showed up towards the end of the Cretaceous and really exploded once all the other birds died out at the mass extinction. So the only modern bird that we're 100% certain lived with dinosaurs and walked around with dinosaurs were waterfowl. And they were very widespread. These were very common birds. So seeing, you know, a stegosaurus and a water bird, a waterfowl, a duck, or a goose together would not have been a strange sight. So this is the one we have the best evidence for. There's also some evidence for landfowl, the galliiforms. Now, the fact that these two are the two that we have the best evidence for, I mean, it's not surprising because landfowl and waterfowl are very, very closely related. They're very much like each other. They both belong to the same infraclass, in fact. And again, the waterfowl were widespread. The galliiforms, if they were there, were much more marginal. But once the dinosaurs died out, these guys just took off really, really, really. Now, why are they in the same infraclass? Well, I keep saying they're similar. Why are they similar? Well, if you think about it, they've got a lot of features in common. They're birds with bulky, heavy bodies. They have large clutches, huge, you know, lots of babies at once. Many of them are polygamous, which is rare among other birds, and they have very precocial young. So they're very similar to each other in lots of ways. But again, the birds that we have lots and lots and lots of good evidence for living with dinosaurs, the modern birds, are the waterfowl. And the ones that we found the most of are the ones we're most familiar with, the Anatidae, ducks, geese, and swans. If you've been to Australia, you may have seen magpie geese. If you've been to South America, you may have seen screamers. Less evidence for those than ducks and geese. So the one that we have the absolute most evidence for is a fossil of a primitive goose called Vegavus. And, you know, like I said, you would have seen him wandering around with hadrosaurs because he was there in the late Cretaceous. About a foot long, actually Antarctica. This particular one is from Antarctica. And like I said, there are lots of these fossils now. He would have looked like a long-legged duck. And his syrinx, the equivalent of the larynx in birds, the voice box, looks very much like those of a modern goose. And so the thought is that he honked and made goose-like sounds. So this is one artist's interpretation. Here's another one. If you would see this bird flying by, you'd have no trouble thinking it was a goose. You wouldn't look twice except to say, what species was that? Another modern duck slash goose that lived during the age of dinosaurs is this guy, Polar ornis. It's believed to be a descendant of Vegavix because they're found in the exact same locations. And as Vegavix disappears, Polar ornis appears. So again, probably a descendant of Vegavix. He was at first thought to be a loon. Now we know that he's not a loon, but instead a duck or a goose. He had a very long, toothless beak. He's in the southern hemisphere. Vegavix was in the southern hemisphere. So the thought is that they didn't have to compete with the Hesperonychs. This would be the southern hemisphere equivalent of a water bird. Probably flightless because their bones were very thick and heavy. That's reminiscent of penguins. Newer yet, you go from Vegavix to Polar ornis to Presbyornis. This is the newest of the three. Appeared just about at the very, very end of the age of dinosaurs. This is actually a genus, so there are two different species of Presbyornis. They're very similar to each other, but one was the size of a goose and the other was the size of a swan. And they're from North America and South America and Australasia, so very, very widespread, lots of fossils. And again, you tend to find them, you find one fossil, you find lots of fossils. So they were colony dwellers. And these guys lasted a long time. They were there before the dinosaurs became extinct, and they were there for 15 million years after the dinosaurs became extinct. So Presbyornis. Here's a diorama I don't remember which museum no, this is actually Disney World. This is if you go to Disney World, you can see this. You can see a dinosaur in the background and you can see Presbyornis in the foreground. And I love this construction because these guys were long-legged geese. So why not make them look like Canada geese? Now, in terms of the land fowl, the evidence is just much, much, much weaker. Again, what makes something a land fowl? They're heavy-bodied ground feeders with short wings, sturdy feet, short, thick bills that are downward curving, and they spend more time running than flying. That's what I mean when I say a galliform. Okay, what is the evidence that they lived during the age of dinosaurs? This guy. And he's less than a year old. We're knowing about him is less than a year old. He's usually called the wonder chicken, Asteriornis. This fossil was found, is believed to have lived just before the mass extinction. He was a seagull-sized shorebird that had features of both ducks and chickens. And so it's possible that it's the last common ancestor of chickens and ducks, of waterfowl and landfowl, or it could be a straggler, a hanger-on. Before they split, you had common ancestors of both, and this particular species may have just hung on. Its face looks like a modern-day chicken, and its butt looks like a modern-day duck. I couldn't find a good picture of its butt, but there's its face, and you can see it's halfway between a chicken and a duck. It's more similar to its overall body is similar enough to a chicken or a turkey that people say, well, see, there were galliforms back then. The other bird that people believe may have been a landfowl is Austenornis. Skeleton is very fragmentary. And so there's disagreement about it, but a fair number of paleontologists say this is a galliform, this is a land fowl, and it lived during the age of dinosaurs. But again, very fragmented fossils, and so not everybody believes that. So no Cretaceous remains. No remains during the age of dinosaurs have been found for ratites, penguins, loons, parrots, raptors, etc. Land and waterfowl are it. That's it. Now I can tell you though that logic tells us that there were also ratites in the Cretaceous. The ratites are things like ostriches and emus. We've never found a fossil of them, but we know they must have existed. And the reason for that is they've got a physical feature. They're paleognathic. That means they have means old jaw. They have the structure of their bill is very, very, very primitive. And so given that there were other birds back then with more modern bills, these guys must have existed back then too. And he would have looked something like this had we found them. It's also possible that the reason we didn't identify them is because they had this bill that we associate actually more with dinosaurs, that the remains have just been called dinosaur remains. Let me show you what I mean. Here's is this a hawk? This is a modern bird's skull. The top of its bill, the two bones on the left and right side of its body are fused. This is an ostrich skull. You can see there's a big gap between the left and right upper jaw bones. This is more what dinosaurs look like. So it is possible that we've actually found some remains and then mischaracterized them. Dinosaur remains. Well, to close, let me just remind you that all the birds, except maybe some ducks and geese that we've been talking about, died out when all the rest of the dinosaurs died out. There's nothing exceptional about that. When the dinosaurs died out, 75% of all land animals died out. And basically, but it wasn't uniformly distributed. Any animal bigger than a shoebox, land animal, died out. And if you lived in the forests, then for sure you died out. And so dinosaurs died out, enantiomorphs died out. They were more forest dwelling than the others. Some ocean birds like Hesperorniths and Ichthyorniths, they probably had a better chance of making it. Ducks had a better chance of making it. But the reason the dinosaurs died out is because an asteroid 4 miles in diameter hit the Earth, 4 miles in diameter hit the Earth, which created a crater over 100 miles in diameter. It was going 40,000 miles per hour. And when it hit with a force 2 million times as powerful as our most powerful atomic bomb. When it hit, there were shock waves, there was falling debris, there was a heat flash that went out almost 1,000 miles. There were earthquakes. It triggered volcanic eruptions. There were worldwide forest fires because of the falling debris and heat. And all the forests in the world burned down. There were mile-high tsunamis. There were poisonous gases from all the volcanoes, sulfur, acid rain. And then the debris caused the nuclear winter. So all big land animals died out. All the dinosaurs died out, and virtually all of these primitive birds we've been talking about died out. And so that's what happened to them. Now, summary just of what I hope you can remember. First off, there were lots of small feathered flying dinosaurs, or as I like to call them, half and half. These intermediary forms with overlapping features with birds. Dinosaur era birds filled many or most of the ecological niches filled by modern birds. They were common. Okay, there were lots of birds. You would have seen them in the sky. The three dominant families are the enantiomorphs, the Hesperorniths in the ocean, and the Ichthyorniths on the shores. And the only modern birds that have been found in the Cretaceous are land and waterfowl. To find out how the other birds, other modern birds evolved, you have to wait till the next installment. And that's it. I'm done. So I'm going to stop sharing.
No, don't be done.
I'm done. I'm done. That's a lot of information. Sorry.
You know,
hard to get that all in.
Amazing collection of photos and outstanding explanation of, the stuff that for me personally, sometimes I don't have a good grasp of all of this. And so it's like ping, it makes sense. And I think you need to create a book, you know, for those of us that are more simplified that really explains this, or if you know of some books that are as great as your presentation. I mean, this is amazing. So thank you for all the time and effort that you have taken, to create this outstanding presentation. It's
Well,
it's
thank you. I mean, for me, it's fun. Like I said, I've loved dinosaurs and birds for most of my life. I would point you to a book, but I don't know of anybody. I mean, I get this stuff from reading the scientific journals, and then trying to piece it all together, at a level that I can understand. And like I said, I know it's so much information, but really, I just hope you all come away with realizing that birds coexisted with dinosaurs and they were successful and there were lots of them. And again, I think when you say birds evolved from dinosaurs, people kind of think dinos, you evolve birds and dinos die out. And it just wasn't that way at all. And also that we're 100% sure that birds are dinosaurs because there are no gaps in the fossil record. There's no leap of faith. I mean, you can watch the legs get shorter and shorter and the wings get longer and longer. You can watch the teeth, the number of teeth get fewer and fewer. I mean, there are no leaps of faith anymore, that we have enough skeletons that we can just watch it happen. And so we got all these halfway ones that you can call birds or dinosaurs.
I love that halfway ones. Yeah, that really is helpful and it makes so much sense. So, and I think a good thing for people, I don't know about you, but last year I loved having the recording so I could rewatch Kim's presentation. And I have recorded this last presentation. I apologize because somehow I didn't get the record working properly, but I will send out the video, the recording, and so you can watch this again, because I mean, there's a lot of great information here. So does anybody have any questions? Please type in the chat or just use your mic and pop on and ask a question. I have a question here from Pam Borso.
Mhm.
And then I see Ed's got a question. How long did it take the dinosaurs to die out?
That mass extinction event, it would have happened almost instantaneously. I mean, meaning over, 20 or 30 years. I mean, and they were all gone. The world became so toxic. And there was nothing. The only land animals that survived that cataclysm were either animals that lived underground, which shielded them from some of the worst of it, especially if they ate insects that lived underground, because then they continued to have a food supply. Or if they ate seeds, because as we know from forest fires, for example, the forest can burn down and the seeds are still there. But if you ate fruit or you ate leaves, there was nothing for you to eat. And so they died out, and then the animals that fed on them, the carnivores, died out. But really, I mean, I don't think anybody can say, to the year, but we're talking about talking about animals that lived 150 million years, they died out in 30 years or 40 years. It was just almost instantaneous.
Thank you. Ed, you had a question.
I've appreciated the artwork tonight, and I've wondered, I don't think the feathers have remained, but the bones did. Am I correct on that?
Well, we have I should go back and show you some casts. Fossils do have feathers. I mean, there are lots of fossils of both dinosaurs and birds, prehistoric, that have feathers. You can see the impression of feathers.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why there's no doubt. And one of my best examples of that is that if you go into paleontology museums now, like the American Museum of Natural History in New York or the Smithsonian, they've replaced their dinosaurs all with feathered. They've all got feathers now. I mean, even T-Rexes and even Triceratopses have feathers. So yeah, we're certain about the feathers.
The same type of feathers we have now?
Well,
Richard?
there are about if you trace the evolution of feathers, there's about 8 or 9 stages in the evolution of feathers. And the very last type of feather, the most advanced feathers, are true asymmetrical flight feathers. Dinosaurs certainly had, lots of dinosaurs had downy feathers, and a fair number of them had symmetrical flight feathers. Asymmetrical flight feathers are rare in dinosaurs and are one of the things that make you call it a bird rather than a dinosaur.
And is there any continuation of color in the process of skeletonizing these?
Yes, you can tell the color. Now we know how to tell the colors of feathers, and you do it 2 different ways. So we actually know the real coloration for a fair number of dinosaurs and ancient birds. One way you do it is you can actually do a biochemical analysis of the rock, which, that where the impression is, and you find trace elements that let you know what color. The second way you do it is the pores that, how do I want to say this? The structures in the skin that actually produce pigments, okay, that produce the pigments, or in the bone that produce pigments of the feathers, are different shapes depending upon what color they produce. And so if you take a really strong microscope and you look at fossilized bones, you can see the shape of the pores that are producing the pigments. And if it's round, it's one color, and if it's an oblong, it's another color, and if it's a rectangle, it's another color. And so between those 2 ways, they actually know what color. Oh, and some both dinosaurs and birds back then were iridescent, the way the way hummers are. That they've not only that they're pigmented, but they're highly iridescent, and they're actually diffracting light to cause their color. So we've got examples of that too.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great question, Ed. Wow, that's fascinating. Craig, you have a question. Do you want to ask it yourself, or do you want me to read it?
Unmute myself. Yeah, why I can't help but wonder, why do you suppose that they eventually lost their teeth, birds?
Oh, I think because most of the changes that take you from dinosaur to bird are designed to help you be a good flyer. And teeth are heavy. If you've got a hard bill, you can ingest most of the food that you need to, especially if you've got some gizzard stones, and you don't need teeth. The other reason, that's one reason. And that's the main reason. But the secondary reason, which people talk about, why did the enantiomorphs end up not making it, is because they still had teeth and there were other birds that didn't have teeth, is that teeth take longer to form than a beak does. And so it requires a longer parental care period. And so it's advantageous for that reason as well, to get rid of teeth if you don't need them.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I have 2 questions. I guess the first one is thinking about, really in this last 10 years, it seems like there's just been incredible growth and shift in what we're learning. And, number 1, why is that? And number 2, where do you think it's going to go in these next 10 years?
I'll take the first one. That's the easier one because I know the answer to that one. Again, birds don't fast fossilize very easily. Generally, when you take a bird and you cover it with mud, it collapses and disappears. The only way you can get a fossil of a bird is think Pompeii. I mean, if birds are living someplace near where there's a volcanic explosion and very fine ash, the heat kills them off, the fumes kill them off, and then very fine ash sifts over their body that's light enough, it creates a cast rather than a crushed mess. That doesn't happen very often. And in China, they have discovered 2 fossil beds that work. And most of these new species that work, and that's why they all have Chinese sounding names, like XIU, things like that, because they're all being, not all, 95% of them are being discovered in China. And that's why there's been this explosion. And like I said, 20 years ago, you couldn't have given a talk like this because there just weren't any fossils. You know, now, because I'm on all these listservs, I probably get a new fossil a month of a bird. I mean, that's how fast they're being discovered. Where it's going to go, I think, are more and more two things. One is I think there's going to be ever more sophisticated biochemical analyses, and what we'll be able to tell from biochemical analysis, I think, is going to, you know, even DNA analysis. You know, you can capture DNA and figure things out. And the other thing is because I only mentioned one study like this, but there have been more and more of them in recent years. Paleontologists getting together with engineers and building some sort of mechanical model to see, you know, how things moved or what kind of jaw force they had or whatever. I mean, most recent one, which isn't a bird one, but got a lot of press, is someone figured out how fast T-Rex walked by building a model. And turns out he was actually very slow most of the time, you know, so that kind of a thing, I think is going to be more and more popular because it's getting more and more popular now.
Wow. It's huge. All the more reason why you need to write this book, Kim.
I'm an amateur.
Kaylin, I think I might have asked a bit of your question, but do you want to just jump on and ask your question?
Yeah, I think that she probably covered most of my question. I guess I can ask a couple different ones. You might have touched on this already in the presentation for the first question. How would bird diversity, like species diversity, have compared in the Cretaceous compared to modern day? And then also, are there ways that you're able, like, what ways can you determine how prevalent a species would have been in a certain area, and I guess what kind of factors are limiting in that, if that makes sense?
What do you mean, to our knowledge of it or to their numbers?
Like I forget what the species name. There was the one bird that was similar, basically the Caspian tern with teeth, and you mentioned that was most widespread or quite common. Or how would you tell what like the population size of certain species would have been, how common they would have been compared to others?
Okay. Okay. That's a good question. But that wasn't your first question. I'm struggling to remember what your first question was.
We keep giving you these paired questions. The first one was, how would bird species diversity in the Cretaceous compared to today?
Okay. I'll give you the best answer I can. Again, we know that there are all these remains or all these species that we have no record of. Okay. I mean, you know, we're always limited by the fossils that we actually have. But I can tell you, so I can't tell you in terms of number of species how it compares. But I can tell you that if you tell me a type of bird, the odds are 90% that we have a fossil bird that lived in that niche. Okay. I mean, you know, that lived in that environment and had that kind of lifestyle. So I guess I would say that if I had to guess, that the diversity was 80%, 90% of what we have today. I can't say that for certain, but given, again, you know, that you've got forest dwellers, you've got things that never came onto land, you've got 5 or 6 different types of woodpecker, that there just was a lot of diversity out there. We're limited by the fact that birds don't fossilize very well. So there's that. In terms of how common a bird is, one way you try to determine that is by how wide a geographic area you find the birds in. So if you find a bird, you know, in 100 different sites scattered, you know, across a wide geographic area, which is what the case is with ichthyornis, for example. I mean, it's only one species, but if you find a bird in North America, it's there. You know, if you're on the coast, that tells you something. You get a sense that they were numerous. There really are there really are some examples of places where they found hundreds of skeletons all jumbled together of some of these birds. That tells you they had to have been pretty numerous. I don't think anybody can give a really precise answer to that. I certainly can't. But if you take the sum of all the flying dinosaurs, what I call the half and halves, and the true birds, I don't know of any paleontologist who would say that the skies weren't as filled as a really birdy place here. I went to a lecture once where the guy said, imagine you're waking up in Ecuador, or in Costa Rica. That's what it would have been like. I mean, the skies would have been filled. They weren't all birds. But I think it's hard to imagine this again, because we all grew up on T-Rex and Brontosaurus, but for every T-Rex, there are all these, foot-long species too. We just don't talk about them, and, they're not as dramatic, I guess. So I'm sorry, I can't answer your question any better than that.
Well, yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate it. And sometimes it's those questions that can't be answered fully that are so interesting in research.
Yeah, it keeps you reading the research.
So anybody else have any other questions that you want to ask? I don't see anything else in the chat.
You have a question.
Is that you, Ed? I hear somebody, but
Yeah. So what is the oldest living bird currently? I know that whenever I see hornbills, the first thing I think of is prehistoric, because they look like they are. Some people may know the answer to this, but what is the oldest living bird currently?
Well, it has to be some sort of duck or goose.
Oh, okay.
It depends. Does it have to be literally the same species, or can it just be the same genus or the same family? But the simple answer is ducks are way older than anything else that's alive
Okay.
right now.
Okay.
And geese.
Okay.
Because they were widespread back in the age of dinosaurs. There were lots of them and different species, and you could see one species evolve into another species. They were alive long enough back then. There's no other bird that comes close to that.
Okay, thank you.
Ed, are you ready for another question? I love Ed's
I think
question.
this is simpler. Were all of these dinosaurs that turned into birds egg created, or were they, born?
Oh, not only egg created. This is great, but one of the ways birds are like dinosaurs, or proof that they're a continuation of dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are the only creatures that have calciferous, back then, they were the only creatures that had calciferous eggs, just like a chicken egg. Okay, so birds have the same types of eggs as dinosaurs. In fact, it's part of the diagnostic criteria to be a dinosaur is that you laid a chicken egg. And not only did they do that, but the eggs are the same color range as bird color range, meaning that they're mostly off-white with reddish brown speckles, or they're robin egg blue. They aren't orange and pink and purple. They're the same color as modern bird eggs are. And there are dinosaur fossils that showed that they brooded their eggs with the same posture, the same outspread wings as birds do. So yes, eggs are some of the evidence you use to say that birds really are dinosaurs. There's just no change at all from how it was back then.
All right.
So go ahead, Ed. So I'm curious, in all of this research gathering that you've put together and stuff, what was any big aha moments for you, and what is something that you just cannot wait to find out, or that you're itching to know?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I'm really waiting for them to find a ratite fossil, or to go back and look at old fossils, because there have to have been ratites back in the age of dinosaurs. Logic just dictates it. Because they're primitive in a number of ways. And evolution sometimes goes backwards, but usually not so dramatically. You know, in the way I know that enantiomorphs didn't lead to modern birds because you didn't take a ball and socket and reverse it 180 degrees. No. So ratites had to have been there. And I kind of like ratites. So, because I used to live in New Zealand and we had kiwis, so which are the other ratites. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, that would be fun. I would like that.
Yes. Well, anybody else have any other questions on this great presentation? I don't know. If you want to turn on your camera and give Kim a great clap, this was just a phenomenal presentation.
Oh, thank
As
you.
always, we can't wait for part 3. Get busy, Kim, and thank you.
Yeah, give me a year or two. And we'll talk about modern birds and when they came in. You know, I mean,
Yeah, it was so wonderful. I just very appreciative of this. And what a great way to cap out our Rainier Audubon pandemic season. And so everybody, thank you, Kim. And we will be looking forward to seeing all of you maybe in person in September. And like I said earlier, we will put out some information in August to let you know what the heck is going on, whether we're in a church, whether we're on a screen, whether we're, you know, whatever we're doing. And, you know, I just really appreciate getting to see all of you on here and, you know, people's emails or, you know, even just all our surveys, like the Christmas bird count was really wonderful seeing all the participants still, you know, doing things. And so hope you all get to go out and enjoy some birds and stuff over the summer. I'm so excited right now with migration and everything. And yeah, have a great summer and we'll see you guys all soon.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. That was
You're
great.
welcome. I'm glad you liked it. Bye-bye.
Loved it. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good
Right.
night.